Hi, today I will tell you a beautiful fairy tale that will make you believe in magic. Cinderella. Once upon a time, a plague infests a village. A gentleman's wife was on her deathbed. She called her only daughter and told her to remain good and kind. A year after her death, the gentleman married another woman with two older daughters from a previous marriage. Once a gentleman went on a business tour and left his only daughter Cinderella with his second wife and two stepdaughters. Cinderella was a lovely and sweet-natured girl, very like her own natural mother, who had been a kind and gentle woman. Poor Cinderella had to work hard all day long so that the others could rest. Her wicked stepmother and her stepsisters treated her like a servant and made her do all the household chores, but Cinderella never complained. She was full of patience and courage. Her cruel sisters only mocked her and made her chores harder by setting up messes. However, despite all of it, Cinderella remained good and kind. One day, the young ladies received royal invitations. The king was going to have a ball. The king invited all the young ladies in that country to attend the ball so that the prince could select one of them for his bride. Cinderella and her stepsisters were also invited. Busy and happy, both stepsisters set about choosing the dresses and hairstyles that would suit them best. Cinderella now had extra work to do. She had to stitch two new gowns for her stepsisters. "Faster!" shouted one stepsister. "You call that a dress?" screamed the other. But Cinderella didn't say anything. She helped them to look as pretty as they could. Cinderella's stepsisters and stepmother dressed in their finest clothes to go to the ball, but Cinderella was not allowed to go. Neither did she have fine clothes or jewels to wear to the ball. Cinderella requested them to allow her to go with them to the celebration, but the stepmother refused. Soon the time came for the stepmother and stepsisters to leave for the big party. Their fine carriage arrived at the door. They all went to the ball in the palace, leaving Cinderella behind. When they went off, Cinderella watched them until they were out of sight and then began to cry. Suddenly there was a burst of light, and her fairy godmother appeared. "Are you all right?" said the fairy. "Who are you?" asked Cinderella. "I am your fairy godmother, of course," said the fairy godmother. Cinderella was crying so hard. Fairy godmother said, "I think you're crying because you want to go to the ball." "Yes," said Cinderella. She looked down at her dirty clothes. "You do look a bit of a mess, child," said the fairy godmother. She took her into her room and said, "Go into the garden and pick me a pumpkin." With a flick of magic, she turned Cinderella into a beautiful princess with glass slippers. She was dressed in a beautiful blue gown. Her hair was set up high on her head inside a golden band. "This is wonderful," said Cinderella. Then the fairy godmother changed a pumpkin into a fine carriage and some mice into men. The lizards were all changed into footmen, who stepped up behind the carriage in their laced uniforms and hung on as if they had done nothing else all their lives. But before leaving, she advised Cinderella to return before midnight since the spell would only last till then. Cinderella stepped into the carriage, and they were off. At the royal ball, the prince met many young women, but he didn't like any of them. Cinderella arrived at the ball. Look! Someone pointed to the front door. The prince saw Cinderella. There is something about her, said the prince to himself, and he walked over to Cinderella. Have we met? Asked the prince. Cinderella did not say anything. The prince had met Cinderella before, but at that time, she was covered with cinder and wearing her dirty old clothes. I feel as if I know you, said the prince. The prince led her onto the dance floor. She danced so gracefully. Cinderella and the prince danced together all night. They laughed and talked. The prince was enjoying her presence, but Cinderella had to leave the ball before midnight. While they were talking, Cinderella heard the chimes of the clock striking 11:45. I must go, said Cinderella. But we just met, said the prince. Why to leave now? Asked the prince. I must go, said Cinderella and rushed towards the front door. Wait, called the prince. Cinderella rushed out to her carriage, leaving one of her slippers behind. He picked up her glass slipper. Cinderella arrived home out of breath, without her carriage, without her footman, in her dirty old clothes again. Nothing remained of all her splendor but one of her little slippers. When her sisters came home from the ball, Cinderella asked them if they had enjoyed themselves. They said yes. A few days later, the prince publicly announced that he would marry whoever possessed the foot for which the glass slipper had been made. The prince went to every house and made every young unmarried lady try the slipper. One young woman after another tried to fit her foot in the glass slipper, but none could fit, and so the prince moved on. At last, the prince came to Cinderella's house. Cinderella's stepmother instructed her daughters to behave nicely in front of the prince, but Cinderella was not allowed to meet the prince. Quick, yelled the stepmother. Get ready. One of you must be the one to fit your foot in that slipper, no matter what, said the stepmother. The prince knocked. The stepmother opened the door. Come in, she said. I have two lovely daughters for you to see. Both daughters tried on the slipper. They did all they could to squeeze their feet into the slipper, but could not manage it, no matter how hard they tried. Are there no other young women in the house? Asked the prince. None, said the stepmother. Then I must go, said the prince. Maybe there is one more, said Cinderella, stepping into the room. Come here, said the prince. Cinderella recognized her own slipper at once. The slipper fitted her feet perfectly, and then she took out the other glass slipper from her pocket. The prince recognized her. Her stepsisters knew she had been the beautiful lady they had seen at the ball, but Cinderella forgave her stepmother and both stepsisters. The prince married Cinderella a few days later, and they both lived happily ever after. Moral of the story: Cinderella teaches us to be kind towards all. We should never let bad things ruin our hearts. This story motivates us to believe in ourselves and our dreams. The idea that patience, courage, hard work and good deeds work like magic to build a bright future and make dreams a reality is also reflected in this story. I'm going to add more stories in this series that will help you to get fluent in English, so be with me guys for more good stories. And click the bell icon for future updates. Thank you. See you with the next story.